Good morning, everyone. My name is Bonnie Ryan. I'm the General Manager of Industry Engagement here at GS1 Australia. Before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet and work today, and any First Nations people that may be participating in this meeting. Specifically, we acknowledge the people of the Kulin and Eora nations where GS1 offices are located, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We recognise and celebrate the diversity of First Nations people and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters across Australia. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for making the time to join us today for what I know will be a really interesting discussion from various perspectives of the importance of traceability in the building and construction sector. So I'd like to extend a big thank you to all the speakers and panellists who have given up their time today to speak to you, and also to their respective organisations for their support. I'm going to now introduce David McNeil. So David has over 35 years experience in the manufacture, sale and distribution of steel products in the Australasian market. So David is a co-chair of the NG tag, and he'll be emceeing the rest of the session. He has a deep understanding of the complexities and challenges in serving customers across the geographically dispersed Australian and New Zealand markets. David's role is about combining people, data and systems to make it easier for customers to do business. Initiatives have covered a wide spectrum from customer self-service platforms through to full business-to-business integrations, which have included the rollout of standard product identification tags for One Steel manufacturing, utilising GS1 standards to further unlock supply chain efficiencies and improved product traceability. David, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Bonnie, and I'd like to add my thanks as well to the people who contributed to today's session. Firstly, who is NG Tag? Well, NG Tag is a national GS1 traceability advisory group, and it's a group of more than 120 executive members from government and industry, where companies can come together and discuss traceability from a whole of economy perspective. It's been going now for about 3 or 4 years, and the whole point of it is about supporting the enhancement of supply chain traceability in Australia to help maintain and build global competitiveness, sustainable economic growth and positive socio-economic outcomes and opportunity. My co-chair is Ram McKellar from Woolworths and myself. We've got a very strong steering committee, and it has representation from industry associations, manufacturing and government agencies and government departments. So it's a very strong steering committee, and it's backed up by the NG Tag Accord. We'll post references to the Accord and the NG Tag at the end of the session today. Our session today is about discussing the significance of traceability for the Australian and building construction products. And through that, we want to help industry and government understand how traceability can assist in managing quality and safety whilst meeting sustainability requirements and boosting productivity in the sector. We're not setting halfway challenges. There's a fair bit we want to cover today. To help work through this, we've got a really full agenda and a very strong panel of people to help work through this topic today. We're very privileged to have Bronwyn Weir to provide some opening remarks. We're also lucky to have Enzo Blonk to provide an international perspective. And then at 10:45, we'll have a panel session of a number of people who'll introduce a bit later to talk through some of the issues and challenges that we're seeing in traceability in construction. And hopefully that'll give a bit of time for any questions through the panel, as well as session insights, and hopefully give you back the rest of your day at 11:30. Yes, I'd like to introduce Bronwyn Weir. Bronwyn is the Managing Director for Weir Legal and Consulting. She's also a non-executive director of Quipex and Melbourne City Mission Housing, and a board member of the Internal Building Quality Centre. She holds honorary appointments as a professional associate at the University of Canberra and an adjunct professor at Western Sydney University. Weir Legal Consulting acts for Commonwealth, state and local government regulators, providing advice on enforcement, prosecution, licensing, administrative law, use of investigative powers, policy and statutory interpretation. And Bronwyn has a long-standing expertise in building regulation. In 2017, she was co-appointed by building ministers to make recommendations for a national best practice approach to regulating the building and construction sector in Australia. And in some respects, this is sort of one of the impetuses for today's session. The Building Confidence Report, which was published in February 2018, has received strong support from building industry stakeholders and policymakers around Australia. Bronwyn was on the expert advisory group that assisted the Australian Building Codes Board prepare a framework for implementation of the recommendations. She regularly acts for the Victorian Government and the VBA as advising on building regulatory reform and operational matters, including combustible cladding, practitioner registration, and strategic advice. Bronwyn, thank you for your time. Over to you.
Thanks, David. And thank you to GS1 for inviting me to make some opening remarks for today's session. It is going to be a really interesting session, even from my point of view, to sit with a panel of such broad experience today. And I'm looking forward to learning as well as contributing to the discussion. I just thought I'd spend a few minutes in this introduction before I introduce the keynote speaker for today, just sort of recapping where we're at with building product regulation in Australia, what we have and what we don't have. And the list of what we don't have is a lot longer than the list of what we do have. We have an obligation in the National Construction Code for there to be evidence of suitability for materials, products, and design that is able to demonstrate compliance with our National Construction Code. And those evidence of suitability requirements are quite clear in terms of the obligation that products must have evidence, that is documentary evidence, to show that they comply. And as a basic principle, that's an important part of a framework for regulating building products. But as I might comment, as we move through, that's not as robust as it could be. We also have a conformity assessment scheme, that being Codemark and Watermark, where Codemark is not mandatory, but Watermark is mandatory for specified plumbing products. So we have the ability for product manufacturers to seek independent conformity assessment through the Codemark scheme, but because it's not mandatory, it's not used all that much. I think there are just over 200 products that have Codemark certificates, which is really just a tiny blip compared to the number of products in the market. We expect, so each state and territory has provisions in its schemes for requiring that designers who specify products for use in the construction process or the design process, building surveyors and other approval authorities and the installers of product are supposed to be the gatekeepers, in the sense that they're supposed to ensure that this evidence of suitability has been presented, reviewed, and accepted by them as part of their role in the building approvals process. So they are the gatekeepers, and they are at the moment sort of the primary feature that we have in our schemes for trying to ensure that products that are selected are suitable for use. We only have one state with chain of responsibility laws, and these are laws that put direct obligations on the supply chain to supply safe, compliant product and to supply minimum information with the product as it moves through the supply chain. So that's Queensland, who've had those laws since 2017. New South Wales has an amending bill in Parliament as we speak to introduce these laws as well. So that's something to look forward to and improve accountability along the supply chain. But unfortunately, we don't yet have that across our whole country. We do have consumer laws, which may or may not apply, and certainly are not there to be an adequate regulation of the building product industry. They may be used more often in civil claims than actually having consumer regulators activate their product safety powers in relation to building products. In fact, there's very little evidence that occurs in practice. What we don't have is a long list. So those chain of responsibility laws are not existing across the country. It is not clear that manufacturers have an accountability in terms of regulatory powers to recall, issue warnings, conduct surveillance and audits of products to make sure they are complying and that any materials and advertising is not misleading or inappropriate. And there is a real lack of confidence in the evidence of suitability regime because we don't mandate this third-party review, and it's not clear that we can rely on the things in some cases that manufacturers say about their products and whether they meet those evidence of suitability requirements. We don't have a process for establishing testing standards for innovative products. We do under the watermark scheme. There is a process there for plumbing products, but not for building products, which is a real gap in the conformity assessment regime. And the minimum information requirements sit in the Queensland legislation only and through evidence of suitability to some degree, but we don't have a robust scheme for what actually is required and what should be included in information statements and so forth. We don't require building manuals at the end of a project to make sure that we have all the information about a build, not just the design documentation, but what's been specified, what products have actually been put into a building, if there's been substitution processes and whatnot. And of course, as is the subject of today's event, we don't have traceability controls through regulation. So we don't have, there is the odd example of where there might be a standard that requires a label or some sort of marking on a product through individual product standards, but we don't have any sort of overarching requirement for there to be mandatory markings to enable product identification and through which we can get access to information which can then be transferred along a supply chain about a product, and which of course is something we're going to talk about a lot more today. On traceability, I see there's two real main issues here and potential areas for regulation. One is around the reliability of the product information. So whilst we have evidence of suitability as a requirement, the evidence, or the anecdotal evidence at least, is that it is very difficult to find information, reliable and accessible information about products and whether or not they are meeting evidence of suitability. And the report that I've referenced there, or that I've shown on the slide there from Nicole Johnson and Michael Tays, which was published earlier this year, really goes to this, a research project which concluded that in the case of the researchers went about seeking information about products through public sources like websites and other things to try to understand whether there was testing information or other evidence of suitability. And they concluded that for the most part, the products that they sought information about was difficult to find information, and the information was not easy to read or understand. And that seems to be the case. So the levels of compliance with evidence of suitability are arguably or potentially not as good as they should be, and which is no real surprise given we're not really regulating that part and we're leaving it to those gatekeepers. We potentially, a way of improving regulation would also to be for government to require products to be on a register of some sort, which would give clear information to specifiers and approvers that what products can and can't be used, and a clear way to remove products from the market by taking them off a register if they are found to be non-compliant. So there are lots of things that can be done in the regulatory space to improve that reliability and that process for the gatekeepers. We also really desperately need more of this work to be done at a national level through a coordinated effort, and I'm always referring to that example of the food industry and the FSANZ as the national body that has a really important role in food safety standards, traceability, labelling and all those other elements for food products that should be replicated in the building industry. The other area is, of course, mandating labelling on products to enable that access to and transfer of information through things like GS1 or GTIN codes or other chips. There's lots of different technology emerging in terms of how we might do that, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of it today. But really, yes, whether governments might mandate the use of digital capability, and what role does data standards have here, and if we create some data standards, is that what governments should be mandating in order to introduce greater consistency in the use of traceability? At the moment, it would seem that those, probably the people on this this event are the more coming from industries where they're really being responsible about this and willing to invest in traceability for all the benefits that it brings. But of course, those investments and costs have to be borne somewhere. And if they're competing against products that don't invest this sort of time into traceability for their products and transparency about their products, then they're always going to be competing with those that are pulling them to the bottom of the barrel in terms of being responsible and accountable for product. So I guess that's where governments are called upon to mandate these sorts of things so that there is a level playing field and that those that are investing in doing the right thing being cut down by those that aren't. But we still then need to also decide, well, what sort of information is it that's to be transferred through these traceability mechanisms? And of course, the emerging policy around sustainability information and recycling and circular economy is one really important driver that's coming forward very strongly and may well help with some of this reform. I think the final slide is just to think about, I guess, as we're discussing today, what kinds of how governments think about these sorts of issues, and in my experience, and what they're willing to regulate and not regulate. And there's often a reluctance to mandate the use of specific technology. In fact, it's very hard to have governments do that or to be seen to be doing that. And so we have to be mindful of how it is we request reform in a way that doesn't advantage certain proprietary products. Reluctance to improve productivity. I mean, a lot of the benefits and gains around traceability mechanisms or processes for product really go to those improvements around the management of inventory, being able to know where your product is, and all of those sort of economic benefits. And they're tangible and useful benefits for the overall economy. But for some reason, when governments are regulating, they're sort of expecting the market to sort itself out around these issues, which is unusual. And asking government to mandate traceability because of its improvements to productivity and commercial gains for businesses is not the sort of way that the request should be couched, because governments are less interested in that. They're more interested in safety and compliance, which of course is a tangible benefit from traceability. And so that's where the conversation needs to be, and governments need to be convinced that by mandating traceability, they will be having a tangible benefit on safety and compliance outcome, as opposed to some of these other sort of economic benefits that they would perceive industry should chase through its own incentives. And so they prefer those market-driven approaches and leaving the market to sort itself out on these sorts of issues, which, like I say, is not necessarily the best way for governments to be looking at these things, but it's a reality, unfortunately. In some cases, some think that what we have is sufficient, or that there's no real evidence that there's an issue, and we can debate that all day. We certainly have, if we just think of a couple of products that have been in our consciousness now for years, in combustible cladding and wiring products and glass products, steel products, most recently in some high profile or sites where we've attracted some media attention around failure of steel. There are lots of examples, but there's actually a real dearth of research, and the Johnson and Tays report that I referred to earlier highlights some of that, the lack of research in this area to give clear guidance to government around the potential benefits of things like traceability and other elements of an improved building product safety regime. I think the one of the really big drawbacks for our country here in Australia, and I'd be interested in Enzo's views on this, is our federated system. I mean, they're really, ministers talk about, adopting the Building Confidence Report, and there's been a lot of investment in the work of the ABC to support jurisdictions to do that. But that then sort of stops, and it becomes up to the states to do things. And that appetite for national coordination, consistency, for having national bodies that can help with that coordination is really, in my observations, quite low in the building sector, and there doesn't seem to be any real interest in the federal government leading that change or volunteering to take ownership of some sort of national coordination role. And I think that's really a major reason why we're not moving forward with product safety as much as we should be. And then the final couple of points here around this sort of consumer protection and product regulation through consumer regulators, as opposed to building regulators having this as a new role. So for most jurisdictions, chain of responsibility laws, if they were introduced, would come in through as a new obligation for building regulators. We already have consumer regulators regulating products in the market and having all of the powers to do that, but there's a reluctance on the side of the consumer regulators to include building products or amend their legislation to make sure that building products are captured and that they become the regulator for building products. And instead, we've sort of had this sort of standoff or hybrid approach of some consumer laws, but then also a push for building regulators to be more active in this space, which really brings us to this sort of final issue is if we do introduce more regulation or powers through building regulators, that's a whole new space of regulation for building regulators. They're currently regulating practitioner registration and perhaps doing some sort of on-site auditing of construction processes and overseeing the building approvals process. If we create laws and put them in the hands of the building regulators to now regulate down the supply chain into the manufacturing and supply area, which is a much larger group of a regulated community to have to oversee and regulate, who's going to fund that? You know, the current funding streams for building regulators are minuscule compared to the size of the industry, and you know, our government's willing to clip the ticket of manufacturers and product suppliers in order to fund the regulation that's necessary. And if we don't fund the regulators, then giving them new responsibilities and powers with relation to regulating the product industry will simply be words on a page. So there's a whole bunch of challenges here and reasons why this is not sort of taking off perhaps as would seem logical given all the benefits that things like traceability could bring. But unfortunately, these are the sorts of issues that governments face, think about, talk about, or are even in the subconscious around how the policy development space works. So that concludes my sort of opening remarks. I look forward to the rest of the session and I'll hand back over to Enzo.
Thanks, Bronwyn. And you filled us with good cheer. It's good to see the progress that's been made and the challenges that yet remain. And I think, you know, this is, which we knew when we brought this topic up for discussion. We'll explore later in the panel that whole question around should industry wait for government, should government wait for industry, and hopefully we'll explore that further in the panel. Now, so Bronwyn, thank you very much. It was good to hear that there has been some progress made, but sobering about the challenges that still remain. We'll now sort of have a consideration around international context. And in that, we're fortunate to have Enzo Blonk, who recently joined Cobuilder as head of market in Europe, based in Brussels. And Cobuilder are a construction information solution provider in Europe. The digitalisation of production and construction standards are near and dear to the Cobuilder. But before that, Enzo was head of community engagement at GS1 Global Office for 11 years, during which he was in charge of the business development side, first of the electronic product code RFID standard, then of the apparel sector, and more recently of technical industries. In those 11 years, he engaged with GS1 communities in all these industries in the use of global standards on authentication, traceability, sustainability, and material life cycle management. In recent years, from 2015 onwards, Enzo has worked with defence, railways, and the construction industry, where he has raised strong GS1 interest and commitment, launched user groups as Decide, Digital Supply Chain in Built Environment, built strategic partnerships with other multinational organisations, and helped published several application standards. Since January this year, he has his own consulting company and works part-time for Cobuilder. In both roles, he is a strong promoter of open standards, supporting overall interoperability, sustainability and traceability. Now, Enzo is joining us from Sao Paulo in Brazil, where he's there for another conference. What we're going to see now is a pre-recorded presentation, but Enzo is on the line and will join our panel later on. And I'll also point out that there is a spot there for Q&A, so feel free at any time for anyone to enter any questions or comments. Thank you.
A very good morning to Melbourne and the rest of Australia. I am Enzo Blonk. I'm based in Brussels, Belgium, from where I'm presenting you today and lifting the veil on a few recent developments, the digital product passport, and basically the insights into adoption and digitization in the construction sector. This is the traceability in construction enabled through open standards. First of all, my main task right now, I'm a consultant, but I have a part-time contract with a company called Cobuilder, in which capacity I'm presenting you today. And Cobuilder is a Norwegian company, originally a Norwegian company with 25 years of experience. It's a privately owned international business company with 120 employees, headquartered in Oslo in Norway, but with subsidiaries in England, or Great Britain as we call it, France and Bulgaria. And they are a strategic contributor to ISO, Building Smart, CEN and CENELEC activities. And we are also the winners of several innovation awards internationally. A few numbers: Cobuilder has 3,300 clients, about 16,000 users, and around 18,000 active projects, mainly in Norway. Our mission is connecting the construction to its digital tomorrow. And the vision is to create a better built environment for the people and for the planet, which we'll touch upon later as well. Cobuilder is a software company which provides services to the construction industry, or as we call it, the AEC sector. But today I do not want to focus on these commercial parts, but mainly on two elements: Define, which is a free open data dictionary. On the other hand, the product passports, the digital product passport, which is gaining momentum, especially in Europe these days. Cobuilder was founded in 1997, and the main reason for its existence, as you show, was to provide solutions for the construction industry's challenges. Let's remind ourselves what these were, or in some cases still are, and how the community is trying to address these. By community, I mean the various stakeholders, of course, the obvious stakeholders in the sector, authorities, as well as GS1 and other standards organization. I will not go into detail of the famous McKinsey report from 2017 on the construction productivity opportunity, but I invite you to have a read. In many aspects, it still is very relevant, unfortunately, almost 7 years after its publication. Let me start with two observations. First one is that there are several life cycles with disruptions between stakeholders. What we see is that there is a project life cycle, and parallel to that, there is a physical object lifecycle that do not always connect to each other. So there's a sort of a large discrepancy. The second observation is that in the industry, too often the wheel is reinvented with each project. So there is an identification method which is specific to each project. According to the BIM convention between the different parties, it creates some waste of time, and of course, significant additional costs. Identification in BIM is most often siloed because of reasons for business model, because that's the business model of the software, or depending on the project version. So what is needed is a need for stability between those stakeholders and throughout all of the life cycles. Problems, there are quite a lot of problems, and I'm not going through all of them. Basically, the major problem is that data is very much siloed and that there is a lack of digitization. Apart from agriculture, on a global level, construction is considered one of the least digitized in the world. The result of all these problems is that in a lot of cases, data is unorganized but accessible, because we still work with paper or with even PDFs at best case. Or it is organized but inaccessible because it is digitized but in different silos, in different data silos. All of this leads to a complete absence of a digital continuity in the value chain. And this is one of the main problems, digitization and silos. What are the key needs, on the other hand, is that the construction industry needs some better processes for specifying and managing information exchange. We need to improve quality, speed, and efficiency, of course, and reduce at the same time costs and time and risk. Very important. The market actors also need to standardize more and define how they communicate with each other and exchange that information to support internal, but also the market needs, the community needs. It all comes down to the question of how do we compare in a complex and fluid environment like construction, what I wanted and what I finally got. So what is needed to overcome this complexity? And the long answer is it needs a framework, so a common and agreed upon way to organize and expose information. It needs a process, so a methodology to consistently and reliably describe this information. It needs a structure, so a schema that ensures that the information is understood and interpreted correctly so that you can exchange it. And fourth, the sources, so body of knowledge that represent the actual rules, terminology, and requirements. The short answer of this is standards. There are various standards out there, ISO standards mainly, but also national standards that give guidance on this. So guidance on the framework, guidance on the process, guidance on the structure, and the sources can be various, but usually it's national, international. For Australia, of course, it's Standards Australia, but also international ISO, CEN, which are the European standards. The goal of all of this is to enable open and standardized exchange of information for the construction industry. So the open and standardized exchange will lead to a much clearer traceability of in the full construction lifecycle. Let's have a look at the process and then the life cycle of a project. What we see here is, and this is a slide that I borrowed from the French colleagues, so the GS1 French colleagues that have a proof of concept working at this moment with Building Smart France. So you see here the full life cycle going from program all the way down to deconstruction and reuse. We used to call it end of life, but that is not the purpose. It's the purpose to reuse something. So we call it second life, third life, fourth life. The first part is mainly based on abstract, generic concepts. This is what we traditionally call BIM, Building Information Modeling. There are quite a lot of ISO standards out there that guide the industry or could guide the industry in that sense. The next step is a more concrete and more specific way of working. The last one is a concrete and detailed serialized. So this is where the specific product's material is being used and is being put into operation, installed up in operation and maintenance. This is where we extend the building information modeling to something more, a larger concept, which is building information management and building identification management. During the next slides, I will focus on two parts in this process. The first part is around the transition from abstract and generic to concrete and specific. As mentioned, in the old definition of BIM, which are the 3D models developed in CAD software, so computer-aided design, each software works perfectly well in its own silo. Once building material and construction product is selected, it will be transported to the site, installed, and basically that's it. What is missing today is connecting the generic BIM model with the selected product. This process today is pretty much, if not exclusively, manually based. By using emails or PDF, it is quite time consuming and most important of all, very much error prone. And by implementing and using interoperable methods and structured data, as well as a considerable level of digitization, a huge gain in productivity can be realized. The tools for this will be data dictionaries, data templates, and global standards. The second part, which will appear in green here, is will focus on the current EU legislation that will impact the construction industry in the coming years, mainly on construction product level. Data templates and data dictionaries, what are they? So the data templates and data dictionaries are part of what we call the open BIM. Open BIM that leads to interoperability. I don't have to explain what interoperability is because I think that most of you know this. what I will focus on today in terms of all the standards out there is mainly this part on data templates, data dictionaries, classifications, and the loin level of information need. What you see here is indeed we first need a common digital language in order to be able to develop data templates. And once we have the data templates, we can start implementing the various standards. Now, what is a data dictionary? A data dictionary, according to ISO standard 23386, is a centralized repository of information about data, such as meaning, relationships to other data, origin, usage, and format. It enables differently built software, so softwares coming from different developers, from different providers, to capture, validate, and analyze the same raw data about construction objects. As there are various data dictionaries around, it needs to make sure that the data is universally understood and that these dictionaries can be interconnected. And thirdly, those data dictionaries are developed and approved by construction industry working groups, which means that this is not something that is imposed. No, this is something that the industry works together on agreeing on. And there is some level of governance that is needed to approve, making sure that there are no, let's say, contradictions with standards, that there is no doubles or triple explanations or data objects or templates around. Now, what is a data template? I've been talking about this a few times. So a data template, which is based on a common methodology, as mentioned before, are used to communicate qualitative information through digital means and throughout the full value chain. Now, the methodology was created and it still is being developed continuously by various standards bodies like CEN and ISO, and they provide the industry with some guidance on some common rules and best practices. Now, the methodology basically is built up primarily of 4 elements: a construction object. So this identifies the object of interest in the construction process. It is around a property. So this is a characteristic that describes this construction object. To create this property, you need some attributes, and those attributes can be measure, value, unit of the property. They're basically metadata of the property that define the physical quantity that the property measures and the unit in which it is expressed. And then, of course, you have a group of properties which allows you to reuse those properties for different projects. Now, how does this look like? Basically, data template, to make it short, is a construction object with its properties. Quite easy. Now, a property, according to ISO 23386, can have many types of attributes, one of which is the GUID, and it's important. So the one here mentioned in the red circle. The GUID is, or what is called a global unique identifier, is a unique identifier generated using an algorithm. It's not so much an identifier, as I would call it, but rather a pointer, because it connects several instances. It can be objects, actors, requirements, properties, and it connects them to each other, creating interdependency. So basically, what the GUID allows is to reuse these different instances for future projects, avoiding creating projects from scratch. So this is basically one of the solutions on the issue that I mentioned before, that every project reinvents the wheel again. What is a data template developed from? What is its basis? Well, there are different data sources to build up a data template from. First of all, there's legislation, as we mentioned. We have the standards, national standards, international standards. We have internationally recognized or industry recognized requirements and user-specific requirements. All of these allow to create a product data template of a construction object with manufacturer data, performance data, for example, carbon footprint, electrical data, operations and maintenance data, environmental data, geometric data, features data, and probably a lot more. The way the industry has worked so far is based on different classification systems and different, mostly proprietary standard systems. If we put the data template centrally in this web of digital communications, is a crucial thing. Why? Let's see an example. Imagine that different classification systems talk about a different, have a different description, a different name for the same thing. Some call it thermal transmittance. Other classification system might call it heat transfer, thermal conductivity, or the U value, or even thermal resistance. As a contractor, this can bring you into a lot of questions and asking yourself what is meant. The whole point of using standards is that for a specific project, you agree on what terminology you use and according to which standard this terminology is described. So this is basically the first way forward in agreeing on something moving forward. Now, I mentioned Define before. Define is one of the products of Cobuilder, which is separate. So it is managed, it is developed. It's a software for creating, managing, and sharing data models within a common data dictionary framework. But at the same time, it is a hub, a multi-data dictionary platform. It is the access is free. It's being used, developed for the industry, by the industry. Why? Because Cobuilder thinks that this is the way forward. Agreeing on common terminology allows the industry to better move forward, be more productive, and basically working on standards. I added a QR code. You can have a look at it on the common Cobuilder defined data dictionary. Have a look at it and see how it works. And I will give you a small example later on. So what is needed? In order to create a data template, you need, of course, as mentioned, a framework, process, structure, and content. All of this is based on ISO standards. The data dictionary is fed through different attributes, properties, and all of this creates a data template. When we fill these different elements, these different attributes with real content by, for example, from a real manufactured product, this is where you get a data sheet. But again, you use common descriptions, you use specific requested attributes to create this, what we would call a digital product passport, to which I will say a few more words afterwards. So let me just build this up in a specific way. So on the left-hand side, you see a template of a window. In this case, we would use two different types of classifications, the Cobuilder window classification and the Uniclass classification. You've got a few property sets. Then the contractor, so the owner contractor, will then say, well, I need this information. I need information on the assessment date. I will need information on the assessment condition, article number, etc., and a few others. The subcontractor then will say, well, I need an assessment date which needs to be higher than the 1st January of 2017. I need, for example, a lifting strength above 5. And then the manufacturer will say, get this information, says, I have this type of product, and the product that I offer has this specific assessment date, it has this specific lifting strength. So this is how basically in a common language, the different actors work together and explain how what they need, what they require. Now, as I mentioned, Define Hub is a platform containing various data dictionaries with a common language, levels, and context across the construction industry. You have, first of all, on the lower level, the business context, which is a common language recognized within a company or within the national sector. On the right-hand side, you see CIRIP, which is a French organization of concrete manufacturers. The level up is the context recognized by the market. So a common language recognized within a specific market could be country, could be region, could be an industry segment. We have a European wood work group as well, associations or standards organizations. The next data dictionary will be the Portuguese data dictionary, which will be go live beginning of next week. Could be important as well for the full Brazilian market, which is a lot larger than the Portuguese one. And one level up is the international context, so a common language recognized across the entire construction industry. So each data dictionary contains the content needed to move up one level. Very important. So let me give you a sneak preview of what a data template could look like in any of the data dictionaries, in Define or anywhere else. Again, you can check this out for yourself, as many parts in the Define are free of use. As an example, I took a steel rod, an item pretty familiar to me and to David as well, as it was one of the main actors in a video that we made, or that Just from Australia, made, I think 6 or 7 years ago in the rail industry for the traceability based on a batch of, I think, 50 rods it was. So let me take this as an example. So we have a data template for specific construction objects. And if we go deep dive, we have, first of all, a description of this in different languages. Because again, a data dictionary is not only to use construction language, but can be used in different countries in the world. It has different properties that come that could be part of a group of properties that could be reused. Again, the group of properties, we see them here according to which classification, what type of product it is according to the different classification systems. And lastly, the references so the reference to various standards. So this is a complete data dictionaries with interlinkages, interconnections with different other elements. Now, if we look at the product itself, so a product catalog, we see here an example of a bunch of steel rods. And again, you will see here that the same language is being used to describe this product. And best of all, why not? At a certain moment, as you see here on the last slide, you see that there is a GTIN mentioned. Yeah, so GTIN is something that, especially in the Nordic countries, Scandinavia, is very much asked for by the industry to be used as a unique identifier for building material. And you see here, you could potentially also look at this one up in Verify by GS1, so the database, the registry that GS1 has put up worldwide, and where you can check whether the GTIN, which is mentioned in here, is being used. We're in the process of including sort of a automatic check linked to Verify by GS1 in the Cobuilder platforms. At the end, define data dictionaries, also basis for efficient communication between the different stakeholders when it comes to defining the LOIN, or level of information need. What do I need? Why do I need it? So the purpose. When do I need it? The milestone. And who needs to act or provide information? This is very important information. And again, this is based on these data templates and the data dictionary. Cobuilder Link is the latest product by Cobuilder, by the way, which allows to create, manage, centralize, provide, and exchange information requirements in a BIM project. Link, again, is not a standalone product. It is, the industry needs something which is not put in silos. It is a gateway using Define or any other data dictionary based on ISO standards 23386 and 23387, using other OpenBIM standards such as IDS and IFC from Building Smart, and allowing various export and integration formats, even the old-fashioned Excel, because let's face it, we know that digitization will not happen overnight, but rather gradually. So Excel will probably stay for quite some time. Now let's move to the second part, which is more on the product side and the sustainability and the digitization of the industry. Besides providing a common structure and a common language to enable more efficient processes, why are data templates even more needed and important these days? Well, first of all, because the EU is working on some packages, initiatives, but also legislation with the aim to become carbon neutral by 2050. It's a very aggressive approach, aggressive not in the sense bad, but very tight deadlines here. The deal is called the EU Green Deal, you might have heard it. And as you see, the digital product passport here holds a very important part in this. There are two regulations which are very important. The ESPR, which is the Eco-Design Sustainable Product Regulation, which is applicable cross-sector. So it starts with apparel, batteries, consumer electronics, and also construction. At the same time, there is the construction product regulation, which is not in a new one, it's an old one, but it needed some revision. And what they have done is that they have included in this also some elements of the Eco-Design Sustainable Product Regulation. So the ESPR is cross-sector, the CPR regulation is only for construction products. Now, we talk a lot about the DPP or the CDPP, which is a tool to create transparency and unlock circularity. It's a proposal by the European Commission, and it should share information about products along the entire value chain, including data on raw material extraction, production, maintenance, and recycling. So as you see, the DPP holds upstream product data, but also downstream product data, which is data collected after installation and during its operational phase. It has quite a lot of impact, those regulations, but also mainly the EU Green Deal regulation package has a huge impact on the construction industry. As you will see on the left-hand side, various buckets of information, climate action, sustainable industry. Something which is very, very important is avoiding unfair competition, because a cheap product from the other side of the world or a more expensive product from just around the corner, you need to be able to compare these two because the carbon footprint, of course, is completely different. On the right-hand side, just as an illustration, not going into this here, is the impact that the EU Green Deal has on various levels of the industry. Interesting here, there's good news, first of all, for GS1 as a whole, but eventually also for the industry that will become more efficient and productive through the use of global standards. The DPP, so the Digital Product Passport, will hold on a mandatory way 3 different identifiers. The first identifier is the product identifier, in this case the GTIN, the unique operator identifier, and the facility identifier. Those 3 elements should enable someone to calculate the carbon footprint. The unique operator identifier and the facility identifier, it's mentioned, it could be the VAT or another identifier, but basically this also could be done by the GLN. All of this information will be held into a centralized product passport registry. This means that any product that doesn't have a correctly structured and filled out DPP will not enter the European Union. It will not be able to be placed into the market there unless it has it. So this applies also for products produced within Europe, the EU, but also outside of the EU. So basically, this will impact the entire world. The CPR, so the Construction Product Regulation, is a different regulation, but it has, again, some overlaps. What is a CPR? CPR lays down some harmonized rules for the marketing of construction products in the EU. Secondly, it provides a common technical language to assess the performance of the products. And it ensures reliable information available to professionals, public authorities, and consumers, because it can compare the performance of products. And as you will see on the left-hand side, that the timelines for the different categories of products are quite tight. So we have started with the concrete products. We have gone to doors, windows, cement, thermal insulation products, and you see the rest of the products, categories of products, which will come in the near future. Now, coming back again to the life cycle of the construction product, which we have seen before, you will see here that there are already some tools that could be used in order to provide a digital product passport at an instance level. All of this, we call it the construction digital product passport if it's construction product, but the digital product passport if it's cross-sector. And what you see here is the digital link. It hasn't been mentioned before. The digital link basically allows, also in the construction industry, to provide some information on different levels on a specific product by applying, for example, a QR code that could be scanned through different softwares and will provide some product information, the product history, certifications, very important, the carbon footprint of a product, recycling instructions, etc., etc. All of these elements, this data will constitute the DPP in the future and is extracted from these different sources. Important in the construction, certifications. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Has it been certified? And the carbon footprint, assuring that there is a common method of calculating this and that it can be proven. At the latest Building Smart Summit, which was held in Oslo in September, the my former Swedish colleagues, GS1 Sweden, together with Nordan, which is a manufacturer of windows, has shown a nice use case where by scanning a QR code on the product itself could give 2 different informations. So the digital link in practice, left-hand side, if you scan the product with your camera on your phone, it will lead you, it would direct you to the company's website for the specific product. If you have a solution provider app and you scan the product with this, you get some other type of information, in this case on certification. So just to show you that the industry has already started to go more digital, to start working on standards, having a common language. This is happening. It requires a lot of push again from the different companies, standards organizations. GS1 is very much involved in this, mainly in Europe, but I know in Australia and New Zealand as well. So things are moving. We need to repeat the message over and over again, because they say in marketing, you need to repeat something 3 times before it's understood. And I think for a not too digitized sector. Probably it needs to be repeated a lot more times, and it needs to be accompanied. So this was my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope it has been interesting. If you have some additional questions besides the Q&A session that we will have a bit later on, don't hesitate to contact me. Open to discussing and exchanging of views and replying to any concerns you might have. Thank you very much.
That was a very comprehensive presentation. It's gone a little bit over time, and I apologise for that. But I think what it underpins is just the amount of data that's going to be needed around confidence in construction. We're going to move straight into the panel, and I'll actually just to sort of get us back a little bit of time, I'll just jump straight to the panelists as I ask the questions. You'll see in the introduction material that there's a bio for each of our panelists. So I'm actually going to change the order. I apologise to Bronwyn and Enzo. I'm going to go to Diane, and Diane Johnson is the Policy and Economics Manager with Master Builders Association. And Diane, in terms of what Bronwyn talked about in terms of the Building Confidence Report and the ABCB's response to that, you were heavily involved in that response by the Australian Building Codes Board. Do you want to elaborate on subsequent work that's been done and how it relates to the establishment of the Building Products Coalition?
Sure. Thanks, David, and thanks for having me here today. It's been fascinating so far. I can't wait to hear from the rest of the panelists. Yes, a disclaimer, I'm from Master Builders, but I was seconded into the intergovernment for the ABCB to help write the response to an element of Bronwyn's work in the Building Confidence Review, and that was building product safety. Out of that came the National Building Products Assurance Framework, which is still an acronym that I regret to this day. But non-conformance of products and non-compliance of products has been a problem for our industry for a very long time, an intractable problem that we've been trying to tackle with, hence my direct involvement with the Product Assurance Framework. Out of that came a recommendation for a holistic package of measures that were broken up into 5 elements of how we can tackle this problem. The third one was building product traceability and product identification and what we can do there. The recommendation there was that government come up with this holistic framework, come up with the standards, the data elements to how we can build a traceability framework off that, and how we can share reliable information in a trusted way. Throughout writing it, the one quote I had from one of our members, one of our builders, was, I need to know that what products I've ordered are the ones delivered to site. And that was a really good grounding message for me to keep. How can we solve this problem? How do we get it was also an opportunity to get a cultural shift to how product information moves with, how the information moves with products. Currently, it's often after the product's there, we needed to get the information with the product, coming with the product as it's moving through the supply chain. So it was a real big driver about building product quality, building product safety. But also we've got another important, productivity in our industry is terrible and falling. We got a real opportunity here to tackle productivity and innovation and the ability to adopt new products, because at the moment it is such a risk-based, there's so much risk in shifting from what you already know because you don't have the product information in a reliable form. Traceability was a real opportunity to improve, to come with, to prove innovation. Now we have the environmental and social drivers. We've got to figure out a way of how we're going to count carbon in a practical way into actually incorporate it into our building decision making. And we know that sustainability reporting is coming very soon. How are people going to demonstrate in their supply chains that what they're using meets the requirements, what they're reporting in terms of carbon and modern slavery and all these important things that we don't have answers for just yet. So the traceability part of the product assurance framework was really important to us, and there was a lot of shared energy in getting it written as a result. Then it sat for a bit, not a lot of action. So a group of us came together and said, well, how are we going to take some initiative and not lose all this great work? These drivers are getting louder, and becoming more important. We need to move. So we came together with Master Builders, the Building Products Industry Council. GS1 has been a great advisor from the get-go, CSRO, the Building Designers Association, ABSEC, the Sustainable Built Environment Council, the Building Surveyors, ABES. We've dealt with the architects, the engineers have been helping us, and the Property Council and the Green Building Council. We said we need to get some action on this product assurance framework, and we've already put together. The first thing was, well, what is the information we need? As Bronwyn said, the evidence of suitability in the NCC is there. It doesn't talk to, well, this is the consistent way that you want your information. Here's the minimum information that you need. Product technical statements are in there as an option. We wanted that elevated, so all building products have, well, here's the checklist of information that you need. We've written a proposal for change as a group and submitted that, and that is now wending its way through government. The second thing we've wanted to tackle is this element 3 of the framework, traceability. How can we write the standards that not standards, but the data information that our industry needs, and how can we build a shared picture of what the information we need going through the supply chain, and how do we make a case for why it is desperately important, why there should be some government leadership on this, because my eternal frustration is we are more important than agriculture, and government is happy to do this and lead this for agriculture, and we're not getting the same love and attention. I think that needs to change. And so how can we make a case? So we're writing a guide now, still very much in the early stages. We very much welcome we're an open church. We welcome all the help and all the advice that we can get to how we can build this shared understanding of what the data is and how it needs to move through the supply chain for our industry. And then hopefully that will build it, and they will come, but we'll see how we go. It's still early days for us. So that's us in a nutshell.
Sounds like you're having a quiet time of it this day. We're also lucky to have Dr. Paul Reichel from the Melbourne Transport Infrastructure Authority. Paul, you've been leading a bit of work in the level crossing replacement project that actually touches on a lot of what we've talked about today, but not so much from a traceability point of view, more from improving productivity on site. Do you want to talk about that work and the supply chain modernisation agenda, and what is the expected outcome of this work?
Sure. So obviously, I'll just give a quick background for those who are not familiar. Level Crossing Removal Project is one of the project offices within the Major Transport Infrastructure Authority, which is in the LXRP, as the Level Crossing Removal Project is known, is responsible for removing 110 level crossings and delivering other brownfield projects around Victoria. So we're a government agency, so we're both a client and a partner in the removal of these level crossings. Obviously, as a delivery agency, we're not a permanent government department. We have tackled this more from it's probably not surprising that we've approached it more from the modernisation of things more from a productivity angle. And we've done this largely to explore how we can streamline the flow of data, which is obviously essential for, traceability, circular economy, sustainability and safety, but also to reduce a lot of the administrative overhead associated with delivering projects. And our approach at LXRP has been looking for improvement, not necessarily perfection. The two projects we're looking at, we're looking to try and demonstrate or to show some demonstrable benefits and then build on this. And we've, begun on the journey. We've started the journey with GS1 to look at how data is exchanged along the supply chain for both steel and concrete. And, probably the rest of what I'm going to say is largely preaching to the converted, but I guess the first part of that was largely to, before you embark on a journey of modernising things, you want to try and understand the existing processes. And this is involved, in the case for both steel and concrete, of getting a comprehensive analysis, of how data is currently collected and shared. And as a result of that, and utilised at each stage of the supply chain. Although I should note that we're probably looking in our sort of 2 projects at a couple of areas in a bit more detail. And obviously the construction sector, as you've already heard, and everyone's well aware, but it's a very fragmented landscape. And we want to try and understand how things work and the maturity of the different players in the market, because that sort of largely will have an impact if we were to try and change things, what the level of change might be for each of the different players. We've done this to try and gain some insights into the current state of affairs, and it's been quite clear that there's some areas of inefficiency and redundancy, and where technology can be leveraged to streamline a number of operations, and probably have looked to a number of other sectors, perhaps with quite a lot of envy, at how streamlined the data exchange happens in retail and manufacturing and lots of other sectors. Agriculture, as Diane just mentioned, there's lots of other sectors where things work a lot more efficiently, and it's like, what do we need to try and do to get that happening in construction? Obviously, as a client, we probably have a slightly different role for the projects that we're involved in. So that's where we're fully aware, though, that the construction sector is a very fragmented landscape. There's lots of different stakeholders, from manufacturers, contractors, project owners, and then obviously in the delivery side, there's contractors, subcontractors, subcontractors, and how does that all flow right through? And there is sometimes an adversarial approach, or there can be at times. So we want to try and make sure that we have collaboration and enhanced collaboration as part of this process. So that's part of what we're looking for this enhanced sort of data sharing, because it has a number of other opportunities to change how the sector operates. When you start to get real-time information flow, which is not the norm in construction right now, as it is in many other sectors, but it's not the norm in construction right now, it can actually change how people work, and that can be quite transformative for the sector in itself. It obviously has a whole lot of benefits that everyone's probably well aware of, like reducing delays, make sure everyone's on the same page, reduces errors when you've got a lot of manual processing. There are still a lot of, what our observations have seen, there's still lots of paper or PDF documents that are exchanged, and Enzo sort of mentioned that in his presentation before. That still is very much the norm. So it's how do we actually try and remove some of those elements and streamline them. And obviously interoperable systems are a key part. And, we have seen certain players that have tried to embark on enforcing, I guess, a certain approach, but or a certain sort of set of reporting requirements on some of their suppliers and subcontractors. But you'll find that each supplier, if you speak to them, or subcontractor, would encounter a different set of standards or a different set of reporting requirements for each client. And then even sometimes parent companies enter into joint ventures, and then the reporting systems in one joint venture is quite different from the parent company. And so interoperability enhances collaboration, it streamlines data exchange, and obviously the standards are essential for trying to ensure that we achieve that ecosystem where we can actually have changes happening in that space. I'm happy to keep talking about lots more of what we've done, looking at the world and where we need to be, and like what's happening in other sectors. Again, there's AI, there's Internet of Things technology that we'd all love to leverage. But if you actually have a look at where we are, there's probably a number of fundamentals that are not in place, and we're not even able to realise or reap some of those benefits. And that's why we're doing this exploration to understand what that looks like, understand with GS1 to understand how we start by doing a number of demonstrations of how that can work for 2 critical materials on our projects in steel and concrete. And again, we're not going to have it for everything, and there'll still be paper dockets that come in for other materials, but we can start to show the benefits that can be realised, and therefore highlight how we could change the sector, and how we may actually therefore look at potentially writing that into what is requirements on our side. Obviously, as a client, we could explore how reporting might happen in a digitized sense and put some rewards around that being in place. But yeah, look, obviously there's a lot of I can keep talking sort of.
I just in the interest of time, I might, because I know you could, very good. But I suppose a couple of other things I'd quickly add is that what's interesting is I think that, and Enzo referred to the McKinsey report from 2017 about the productivity opportunities in construction. And I think some of the analysis that you've shown bears up that, yes, there's definitely some savings. And I think the other point that's probably worth quickly confirm that from a public interest point of view, the work that you're doing through the Level Crossing project and the foundations that you're talking about is actually, it's not necessarily set to be proprietary by the Level Crossing project. It's more there, you want to get it out there in the public interest as a standard way of working.
Yes, certainly. We don't want to have any IP over any. We want it to become the norm. We want to streamline the sector. It's a win for the sector, is a win for us as a government, as a procurer of lots of construction works, both now and into the future. Will benefit greatly from that being a more streamlined process. It has a number of requirements on data and reporting that are only likely to grow with time. And so it's obviously essential that there is a standard and streamlined way of sharing that information rather than it being emails, phone calls, and other fairly primitive means of exchanging information. So we'd like to get to machine interoperability is sort of where we'd like to get to.
Very good. Thank you. Sorry, I just want to give everyone a chance. Scott, as Executive Director and CEO for the Steel Reinforcement Institute of Australia and also Director and Chair of the Building Products Industry Council, what we've talked about so far in 2 minutes or less, if you can talk about from a steel industry point of view and also knowing that you've been heavily involved with the Australian Steel Institute, what the steel industry is doing in terms of the topics we've discussed this morning.
Yep, sure thing, David. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for the co-host for turning my video on. It wasn't letting me do that. So great keynote presentations from Bronwyn and Enzo. Very much appreciated those and everyone's thoughts so far. Traceability awareness, clearly it's a collective conversation, collaboration's required. The steel sector, you may not be aware, has been working on this area since the early 2000s. We did a lot of B2B work back then, but that was in the days of paper and it sort of fell flat. Today, obviously, with our digital change, we've certainly got opportunity to now make this more of an everyday thing that we all do as part of our business practice. So Steel Reinforcement Institute of Australia, along with Australian Steel Institute, which is the structural side of the market, we're obviously the Rio side, has put together a steering committee. We've been working on this for a while, mapping out where we're heading in this space. Been doing a lot of onboarding, but we've got our members informed now. So we're looking at how we take it forward in a sensible way with this coalition of the willing, you might call it. We're honing in on the generic protocols and interoperability side of it. So we don't want to affect people's business as usual because some larger firms are already doing this, but we need to make it so it works for everyone and we move forward in this space. So we're obviously not waiting for government, but if traceability is not made mandatory, as others have said, people just simply will not move into this space. So there's no champion driving creation of traceability. There's no set protocols here in Australia on this ecosystem, but I'm glad to see what Enzo presented earlier. And obviously, just one other comment of mine, there's a very small percentage of people that will actually go there for the good of mankind. So it does need people pushing it along like government, as Bronwyn sort of inferred. But overall, traceability delivers confidence through, enhanced information. Obviously, I'm getting to some key things that I want to just cover with SRA, and then I'll hand back on to David. But drivers for us are productivity, obviously quality, safety for the public, so meeting Australian standards and having that confidence that, the performance requirements are met. There's a competitiveness side, and obviously we'll talk about that more in a moment. It'll link in EPDs, sustainability credentials. It'll facilitate future adaptation, reuse. And I'm seeing a lot of discussion around in the design fraternity at the moment, greater design lives. So design lives up to 200 years. What this is going to mean, that traceability will then take it into that intergenerational next generation and take that data through so that people can then reuse and adapt these structures. And obviously this will avoid rework time and save cost. So we've sort of concluded that traceability has to have limited levels of granularity, but required because when it gets to the end person, so like some of our members, for example, they're concerned about their IP and work they've already put into this space. So it's got to have generic protocols so that they can then take that and then do what they need to do as part of this process. And like all Australian standards, you have to meet those minimum requirements. So, you need those identifiers, pointers to other credible validated data sources, which is trust, and you need information to flow through to the building manuals, which I heard before doesn't happen, and that needs to happen. We've decided it's not to tell you how to do it, but how you actually get there is up to you. We've realised that Australian standards are a key part, and this will segue into Adam, of this process. So SRIA and ASI, who I used to work for years ago, have always been strong supporters of Australian standards. We're both on IT 34, which is data standards, automatic ID and data capture techniques. We definitely need more younger people involved. So we need more, if you want to call it, software savvy people. Some of our associate members are in that space, and they will be needed to work with these protocols and manipulate data so that it flows down through this framework that's going to be engagement with industry. And clearly I'm going to finish up here, David, we all have individual streams of traceability. All of those, however, flow through to that end builder, end customer, and they've got a mountain of data to sort through. So, these protocols and these software and younger people need to be able to help this process occur. And I'm sure Adam will expand on this, and it must be trusted and verified. So that's where I'll finish up, David, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Scott. Much appreciated. And yes, I'll we are very close on time, but what I'll do, I'll ask Adam to make a few comments. But before I do, I'll just quickly, Enzo, I don't think we're going to get a chance to get a question to you. And Bronwyn, I actually think I might get you to make a comment after Adam to sort of give a bit of a temperature check to if you think that what you've heard from the panelists gives you a bit more confidence that the things that were identified in your report from 2018 give you confidence that we've got an approach to actually meet those recommendations. So before I do that, though, is Adam, as General Manager, Engagement and Communication for Standards Australia. Standards have got a bit of a mention during the course of the morning. I was wondering if you'd like to comment on the work that Standards Australia is doing around the importance of unique identification for building products and for digitisation in construction.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'll try and be brief. So I'm a little bit more optimistic, perhaps, than colleagues as to progress in the next short while, because what we see, the fourth wave of innovation being mass production, the fifth wave of data and ICT, and now this sixth wave of sustainability coming together. And I think relying on building regulators who are, to Bronwyn's point, smashed in terms of resources, they got a lot of stuff on to try and help us solve this problem might be a mistake, although they need to be on the bus and on the journey. I think what will drive change is the sort of EU Green Deal and its equivalents, plus board reporting on carbon, plus circularity. And it's perhaps the best time we've ever had to be having this conversation, David. To go to the question about building products, I mean, it's been answered, but transparency, quality, regulatory compliance, data in terms of carbon and energy embodied and slavery and all this stuff is now expected. And because it is expected, forget the building regulators for a second. It will be boards and it will be trading partners who will be calling for this to be done. Now, my word of caution, David, just to close out in the last sort of 20 seconds, there's really good work going on here. There's really good work going on at the infrastructure level. There's all this digital twin stuff going on. There's 17 groups of people trying to solve this same problem, and they're all trying to solve it through standards. So for us, what we'd like to do is just to make sure that through the full supply chain, we're using international standards, globally recognised international standards, and we're doing that once. And I think the work that you guys are doing on IT34, the work that's being led through a range of other standards committees is the way to solve that problem, so long as we all stay on the same paddock as we push through. And I'll stop there, noting the time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Adam. Bronwyn, in 1 minute or less, you want to make a comment about what you've heard from the panelists, your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of points. The work that Enzo talked about in terms of where Europe's going with this is incredibly fascinating. I have been researching that, and I can't help but think, why don't we just do what they do in Australia? But we don't. We haven't done that. Even the conformity assessment system, the fact that they've got 30 odd categories of construction product that come under that CE model in Europe is just not something that Australia's been willing to adopt in terms of identifying product types and creating controls around the supply and use of those products. I don't know why we seem to hit these blockers, and maybe Adam's point is right, take it off the building regulators and put this somewhere else with some fresh thinking. But I do think it goes a little bit back to the federal government needing to step into this space in a meaningful way, particularly given the funding it is about to push into the construction industry for resolution of these housing supply issues and so forth. It should be demanding something back or setting overlays around some of this sort of modern regulatory thinking into how we actually give assurance. Actually, I think governments should definitely be in the space of trying to drive productivity improvements, even though, as I noted earlier, this is one of the things that they don't traditionally see themselves as interfering with through regulation. So there needs to be a monumental shift, and we do have these sort of global things happening to give us blueprints for this. But, you know, whether there's a willingness, I don't know. I'm not seeing it right now. I want to be optimistic, but I feel like there's some sort of fundamental sort of issue around structurally how governments are looking at this. I think the points made by Paul are really interesting because on the one hand, we have government as one of the biggest purchasers of construction services in our country, and who has the ability to drive forward some of these requirements on the industry in terms of it as a contractor with government. And in fact, of course, is doing that through projects like the level crossing removal project that we've discussed today. And yet that part of government is so completely isolated from the part that does regulation and that has the ability to mandate and require participation in this across industry in a much more meaningful way. And so we seem to have this, constant disconnect between different parts of government and how, the regulatory side could actually drive forward change that would help government as a procurer of construction services and bring down, or improve productivity, which would lead to cost savings for government as a purchaser. So we're not seeming to connect those dots. And I think also a call out to the steel industry, because steel, together with timber, glass, and some of these sort of product types within the ecosystem, have been really proactive around creating an environment for better conformity, greater levels of trust in product. But again, they've been voluntary. Governments don't seem to want to recognise and mandate that good work through even those product types beyond the actors within the industry or the industry associations that have driven forward really good practice. So it's really challenging, but I think we need to keep having these conversations. I think we need to make it really clear for government what is wanted and how they can bring forward this. The final point I want to make, as much as traceability is incredibly important and, needs, in my view, to be mandated, and we need to be looking to that European initiative that's occurring and seeing if we can adopt that here, we have to make sure that whatever data is captured and transferred through traceability mechanisms actually is verifiable and has some credibility to it. And so these underlying issues around conformity assessment and making sure that products are what they say they are and that the data is reliable is really important. And I don't think we've got that right yet in Australia. That's not to say that we shouldn't progress with traceability requirements, but we need to be doing more than one thing at once, because we have to have some credibility around what that data is that is to be transferred and shared through these digital processes, and make sure that we're actually getting that bit right as well, and that there is some trust and transparency in this digital information. So that'll be my conclusion.
And I think actually I'm going to be a cheat, and I'm going to use your closing remarks as my closing remarks, because I think you've nailed it, but I will just quickly say that on the area of conformity, there's actually a lot of work being done, led by Australia, on digital product conformity, led by NADA and GS1 and JASANS, and Steel's been pivotal in that as well. So a little shameless plug there, but there's also some really good work there. I want to thank everyone. I know we rushed it a little bit there at the end, and I apologise, Enzo, you didn't get a chance for another talk, but you got a good shape. And I want to thank all the presenters and also GS1 for putting on today. You'll be able to get a copy of what's happened today on the GS1 NG Tag website, and there'll also be links to other content as well that's associated with what we've talked about today, and also what's happening in traceability in other industry sectors. But on that note, and noting that we're 3 minutes over time, I'd like to thank everyone for their time this morning and their contribution. And I'll thank you very much and declare the meeting closed.